Now, Caleb, what was presented to Congress about Russia and the U.S. presidential elections?
Well, it's been quite an interesting day on Capitol Hill. Now, one fact that was made abundantly clear in the testimony before the Armed Services Committee was that in no way were the election results or the vote counting process in any way tampered with by Russia. Now, this phrase that's been thrown around throughout the media in the U.S., hacking the vote, hacking the election, this is a little bit deceptive because at no point were the election results, the vote counting, the tallying in any way interfered with by Russia or by hackers or by anyone else. Now, that didn't stop John McCain from using some rather inflammatory language when he was speaking this morning. Let's take a listen to what he said.
If they succeeded in changing the results of an election, which none of us believe they were, that would have to constitute an attack on the United States of America because of the effects if they had succeeded.
So, Caleb, if Russia isn't being accused of hacking the vote or changing the election results, what exactly is being alleged here?
Well, the main focus of the hearing in regards to Russia was they were beating that old dead horse about fake news. The allegation was that Russia in general and RT in particular had been spreading information, and as a result, people had been led and essentially pushed to vote for Donald Trump. Now, this allegation has been repeatedly raised. We know a couple months back, the Washington Post actually raised this allegation about fake news. It was quite an interesting morning. A lot of statements were made. Again, a lot of accusatory language, but not much evidence really being presented. Let's take a listen to some of what was said on Capitol Hill.
We plan to brief the Congress and release an unclassified version of this report to the public early next week. But until then, we're really not prepared to discuss this beyond standing by our earlier statements.
Now, as you just heard, they were talking about the fact that even though Russia did not interfere in the election results, they said it was possible that Russia could do it at some point in the future. However, they didn't present any evidence of that claim either. They said evidence could be coming at some later point. They would provide that evidence at some point in the future that Russia could possibly interfere in the voting. Now, another interesting point that was revealed at the same time that Congress was giving its testimony, this hearing was taking place with the Armed Services Committee. At the very same time this was going on, BuzzFeed revealed that the FBI at no point looked at the Democratic National Committee's computer. The report that they released alleging that Russia was behind the hacking of the Democratic National Committee was all based on information the FBI received from a third-party computer contractor. So a lot of information is being circulated, a lot of claims are being made, but not a lot of real solid evidence is being provided. A lot was said this morning, a lot of accusatory language, but no real proof and no real truth seems to have been put forward.
All right, thanks, Caleb. Thanks for this report. That was RT correspondent Caleb Maupin. Now, today, National Intelligence Director James Clapper told the Senate Armed Services Committee during a hearing that Russia poses a major security threat to the U.S. Clapper accused Russia of cyber hacking and interfering in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, aiding in President-elect Donald Trump's win. To discuss this further, I am now joined by former U.S. diplomat Jim Jatras. Now, Jim, Clapper told the Senate committee to expect an intelligence report that will link President Putin to the alleged hacking. But if they are only now finishing this report, which will be delivered to President Obama, then on what grounds did Obama have for expelling those 35 diplomats and closing those Russian compounds?
That's a very good question. It's one that occurred to me as well watching the hearing today. Obama's getting the report today. Trump is supposed to get it tomorrow, and there's supposed to be a declassified, redacted version released next week. We're talking about the end of December that Obama imposed these steps. You wonder on what basis he did do that, whether he was just shooting from the hip. Again, I think that points towards sort of the political nature of this. I must say, by the way, as an old Cold Warrior myself, I was a little bit amused by the militancy of some of the Democrats in particular on the committee. Where were these people back when there were real communists around? We could have used their help.
All right, now, even though Clapper admits that espionage is not typically considered an act of war, does it concern you that senators like John McCain are increasingly pushing for these hacking allegations to be considered as an act of war, especially considering we, once again, do not have evidence that Russia meddled in the 2016 elections.
I don't think that language is appropriate. I must say, on the witness side, the administration, intelligence community people, they were much more careful in their language. Clapper, in particular, was much more careful to distinguish between espionage that goes on all the time between countries and even cyber espionage, and what would constitute an offensive trying to disrupt the national structures of another country, and what the appropriate response would be. And he didn't seem to want to go beyond that, despite invitations to do so from the dais.
All right, now one major point is that while everyone is focusing on this hacking bin and that Russia may have meddled in the 2016 elections, although there's no evidence for it, no one is talking about the content of those DNC emails, except for Julian Assange, which reveals that the DNC manipulated the outcome of the Democratic primary. So why is that not being considered?
Well, you know, one of the questions, again, occurred to me if I had been one of the senators to say to them, can you say for certain, can you say for a fact that WikiLeaks got this information from Russian hacking? And I suppose the reason they don't ask that is they probably cannot say yes to that question, to the answer to that question. Even if that were true, and I don't think it is, even if that were the case, what are they going to accuse the Russians of? Releasing information that is true about some of the corrupt things the Democratic Party was up to. How dastardly of the Russians to do that, to let us know what these people were actually doing. Why can't they just peddle influence like the Saudis do, the old-fashioned way with money?
All right, now, Jim, I want us to take a quick look at Clapper. He made some remarks this morning at the briefing.
Well, there has been a lot of focus on the hacking. This was actually part of a multifaceted campaign that the Russians mounted. RT, which is heavily supported by, funded by the Russian government, was very, very active in promoting a particular point of view.
Now, my question to you, Jim, is why is this intelligence establishment more concerned with RT than it is with presenting evidence?
Well, you know, as he said, RT had a point of view. I'm sorry, points of view now out of bounds. This whole meme you get about fake news and they try to associate with RT or other alternative media is really an attempt to suppress alternative sources of true information, not false information. You can't accuse somebody of disinformation unless you can show where it's false, where it's wrong. When we look, for example, at the Washington Post saying the Russians hacked a Vermont power plant. Oh, well, it turns out they didn't do that. Oh, CNN reports the Russians are closing the Anglo-American school in Moscow in retaliation for what Obama. Oh, no, it turns out that's not true either. Where's the real fake news coming from? It's coming from a source that a lot of Americans increasingly distrust, the mainstream media, not from alternative media like RT. If they want to accuse RT of having not just point of view of being fake news, come up with the goods. Where is the information false? If anything, it's a corrective to what our mainstream media is not telling us, or a corrective to what they're telling us that just isn't true.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim, for that. That was former U.S. diplomat Jim Jatras.